The scream tore through the alley behind the nightclub, sharp and desperate, cutting through the bass-heavy music that pulsed from within. Penelope Morrison's hands were already bleeding, scraped raw from clawing at the brick wall as she tried to scramble away from the pack of feral creatures that had cornered her in the darkness. They weren't quite wolves, weren't quite dogs, something in between, something wrong, with eyes that gleamed yellow and hungry in the dim light spilling from a broken street lamp overhead. She'd been stupid, so incredibly stupid. Her friends had warned her about taking shortcuts through the old industrial district, especially after midnight, but she'd been running late for her shift at the 24-hour diner, and her phone had died, and she just wanted to get there quickly. Now she was going to die for that impatience, torn apart by whatever these things were, and no one would even know what happened to her. The largest of the creatures lunged, teeth bared, and Penelope threw up her hands instinctively, knowing it wouldn't help, knowing this was the end. She squeezed her eyes shut. The roar that shook the alley made her bones vibrate. It was nothing human, nothing animal. It was ancient and terrible and filled with such raw power that the creatures attacking her yelped and scattered like leaves before a storm. Penelope's eyes flew open in time to see a figure standing between her and the retreating pack, tall and imposing, with hair so pale it seemed to glow in the darkness. Then he turned and she stopped breathing. He was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Impossibly pale skin, features carved like marble, eyes that burned crimson in the shadows. He moved toward her with fluid grace, and she should have been terrified. Everything about him screamed danger, but instead she felt oddly safe as he knelt before her, his expression shifting from fury to concern. "Let me see," he said, and his voice was like velvet over steel, cultured and old-world elegant. He reached for her hands, and Penelope found herself extending them without thinking, letting him examine the torn palms, the scraped knuckles, the blood that dripped steadily onto the dirty pavement. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook. Thank you, those things, they." "Wild dogs," he said dismissively, though she knew they'd been nothing of the sort. "The city has become infested with them. You shouldn't be out here alone." His thumb brushed across her palm with surprising gentleness, and she hissed at the sting. "These need attention. I have a first aid kit at work. I was just trying to get there." She tried to pull her hands back, but his grip tightened fractionally. Not painful, but firm, possessive. "You won't make it 3 blocks before infection sets in. The streets are filthy." He stood in one fluid motion, pulling her up with him. "Come, my car is nearby." "I don't even know you," Penelope protested, finally getting her hands free and cradling them against her chest. "I appreciate the help, but I'm not getting in a stranger's car." Something flickered in those crimson eyes, amusement maybe. "I just saved your life. If I meant you harm, I would have let those creatures finish what they started. Or you could have planned the whole thing." Now he definitely looked amused. "You think I have wild dogs at my command? I think I don't know what's happening, and I need to get to work before I lose my job." She stepped around him, trying to ignore how her legs trembled, trying to pretend she wasn't terrified and in pain and completely overwhelmed. He caught her elbow, gentle but unyielding. "You're bleeding, you're in shock, and those things may circle back. Let me help you." Penelope looked up at him, really looked. He wore an expensive black coat that probably cost more than her rent, tailored perfectly to his lean, muscular frame. Everything about him spoke of wealth and power and danger, but his eyes, despite their unsettling color, held something almost kind. "What's your name?" she asked. "Aleksandros." The name rolled off his tongue like music. "And yours?" "Penelope. Penelope Morrison." "Well, Penelope Morrison, will you allow me to tend your injuries? I give you my word you'll come to no harm by my hand." There was something formal in the way he spoke, almost ceremonial, and Penelope found herself nodding before she'd fully decided. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the way her hands throbbed with pain. Maybe it was the fact that she'd never seen anyone or anything move the way he had. And some instinct told her that being under his protection was better than facing whatever else lurked in these streets. His car was indeed nearby, a sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than she'd make in 5 years. He opened the passenger door for her, then retrieved a first aid kit from the trunk before settling into the driver's seat. Instead of starting the engine, he angled toward her and took her hands again, this time with antiseptic and gauze at the ready. "This will sting," he warned, and proceeded to clean the wounds with methodical care. Penelope bit her lip against the burn, studying him in the glow of the car's interior lights. His skin really was that pale, almost luminescent. His hair fell in white waves to his shoulders, framing a face that belonged in a museum. And those eyes. "What are you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Aleksandros paused, meeting her gaze. For a long moment he said nothing, and Penelope wondered if she'd just made a terrible mistake. Then he returned to bandaging her hands. What do you think I am? I think you're not human. I think those weren't really wild dogs. I think I've stumbled into something I don't understand. Clever girl. He finished wrapping her left hand, started on the right. And you're not screaming or trying to flee, which makes you either very brave or very foolish. Probably foolish, Penelope admitted. But I'm too tired to run, and you've been nothing but helpful. So I figure I might as well see where this goes, a practical approach. He tied off the bandage with expert precision. I am what your legends call vampire, though the reality is more complex than your stories suggest. Those creatures were ghouls, failed vampires, turned improperly and driven mad by the transformation. They hunt in packs in the forgotten places of the city. Penelope's breath caught. Vampire, of course. It explained everything: the impossible beauty, the crimson eyes, the way he'd appeared from nowhere and scattered those creatures with just his voice. She should be terrified. She should demand to be let out of the car immediately. Instead, she said, "Are you going to hurt me?" "No." The answer was immediate and absolute. "You are under my protection now, Penelope Morrison. Nothing in this city will touch you." "Why, you don't know me." Aleksandros was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Because you interest me. Because you didn't run screaming when I revealed myself. Because—" He paused, something like wonder crossing his features. "Because the moment I heard your scream, something in me responded. Something I haven't felt in centuries." "How many centuries?" Penelope asked, because apparently near-death experiences made her reckless. Enough to have watched this city rise from nothing. He finally released her hands, though she could still feel the phantom warmth of his touch. "I am what they call the Vampire King. Though I've been away from my court for some time, I grew tired of politics and power games. So you just wander around saving random humans from ghouls? You're the first I've encountered in months. Most humans have enough sense to avoid the industrial district after dark." "I was running late for work," Penelope said defensively. "And my phone died." "Where do you work?" "PT's Diner over on Lexington." "I'm already an hour late. They're going to fire me." Aleksandros started the car, the engine purring to life with barely a sound. "Then I'll take you there and explain the delay. I'm quite persuasive when I need to be." "I bet you are." Penelope settled back in the seat, cradling her bandaged hands. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving her shaky and exhausted. "This is insane. This morning I was worried about making rent and whether the guy in apartment 3B was ever going to ask me out. Now I'm in a car with the Vampire King. Is the gentleman in apartment 3B still of interest to you?" There was an edge to his voice that made Penelope glance over sharply. "Not really. He picks his teeth at the mailboxes and leaves his trash in the hallway." "Then you have excellent instincts." Aleksandros navigated the empty streets with casual expertise, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the center console. "Tell me about yourself, Penelope Morrison. What does a woman do when she's not being attacked by ghouls?" It was surreal, having a normal conversation with someone, something that had just admitted to being a centuries-old vampire king. But Penelope found herself talking anyway, telling him about her job at the diner, her tiny apartment, her abandoned dreams of art school when the money ran out. He listened with genuine attention, asking questions, seeming fascinated by the mundane details of her life. By the time they pulled up outside Pete's Diner, she'd almost forgotten what he was. Then he walked her to the door, moving with that inhuman grace, and reality crashed back. "Wait," she said as he reached for the door handle. "What happens now? Do I just go back to normal? Pretend this didn't happen?" Aleksandros turned to face her fully, and in the neon glow of the diner's sign, he looked otherworldly and magnificent. "That depends. Would you like to see me again?" "I don't think that's a good idea," Penelope said, even as every cell in her body screamed yes. "We're from different worlds. You're literally royalty. I serve coffee for minimum wage. I didn't ask about practicality. I asked what you wanted." Penelope met those burning crimson eyes and felt something shift in her chest, something dangerous and thrilling. "Yes. I want to see you again. Then you will." He produced a card from somewhere, pressed it into her palm. "This is my number. Call me when your shift ends. I'll take you home safely. I finish at 6 in the morning. I'll be awake." He smiled, revealing just a hint of fang, and Penelope's stomach flipped. "Go, your employer is watching through the window and looks displeased." Penelope glanced inside and saw Pete indeed glaring at her from behind the counter. She turned back to thank Aleksandros, but he'd already vanished into the darkness, moving too fast for human eyes to track. She stood there for a moment, clutching the card in her bandaged hand, wondering if she'd hallucinated the entire encounter. Then Pete rapped on the window, and she hurried inside to face the music. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Pete yelled at her for being late, then noticed her bandaged hands and softened slightly, accepting her story about being attacked by wild dogs with the weary resignation of someone who'd lived in the city too long. Her coworkers fussed over her, brought her coffee, asked if she was okay. Penelope went through the motions, serving the late-night crowd of truckers and insomniacs and club kids coming down from their highs, but her mind was elsewhere. Vampires were real. The Vampire King had saved her life. He wanted to see her again. It was impossible. It was insane. It was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her. When 6 o'clock finally rolled around and Penelope clocked out, she found herself reaching for her phone before she'd consciously decided to call him. The card had a single number on it, no name, printed in elegant script on heavy black cardstock. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed. He answered before the first ring finished. Penelope. Hi, I'm done with work, but you don't have to come get me. I can take the bus, I'm outside. Penelope looked through the diner's windows and sure enough, there was the sleek black car, Aleksandros leaning against it with his arms crossed, looking like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Several of her coworkers had noticed him too, and were staring with undisguised interest. Okay, she said into the phone, unable to stop the smile spreading across her face. I'll be right out. She hung up, grabbed her bag and tried to ignore the whispers and giggles from the other servers as she headed for the door. Maya, who worked the morning shift with her, caught her arm. Who is that absolutely gorgeous man, and where can I get one? It's complicated, Penelope said, which was the understatement of the century. Uh-huh, well you be careful with that one. He looks like trouble. I know. Penelope squeezed her friend's hand. I will be. Outside, the morning sun was just starting to lighten the eastern sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. Aleksandros stood in the shadow of the building and Penelope noticed how carefully he positioned himself away from any direct light. The sun, she said as she approached. Does it really kill me? Eventually, yes. I have perhaps 20 minutes before it becomes painful, an hour before it becomes dangerous. He opened the passenger door for her. But I wanted to see you safely home. You didn't have to risk yourself for that. Yes, he said quietly. I did. They drove in comfortable silence through the awakening city. Penelope's apartment building was in a rough neighborhood, shabby and worn, and she felt suddenly embarrassed as Aleksandros pulled up in front. He, however, showed no judgment, simply got out and walked her to the entrance. This is me, she said awkwardly. 5th floor, no elevator. The glamorous life of a waitress. May I see you again? Tomorrow night, perhaps? I work tomorrow night. The night after then. Let me take you to dinner. Penelope laughed. You eat dinner? I can consume regular food if I choose, though it provides no sustenance. I enjoy the ritual of it, the companionship. He stepped closer and Penelope's breath caught. Say yes, Penelope. This is crazy. You're a vampire king. I'm nobody. You're not nobody to me. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with impossible gentleness. I've lived for over 1,000 years. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've known countless humans, countless vampires, and in all that time, I have never felt what I felt when I heard your scream last night. Like someone had reached into my chest and twisted, like I would burn the world to ashes if it meant keeping you safe. You don't even know me, Penelope whispered. Then let me learn. Give me time to discover everything about you. Please. She should say no. This could only end badly. But looking into those ancient crimson eyes, seeing the vulnerability beneath the power, Penelope couldn't bring herself to refuse. Okay, dinner. The night after tomorrow. Aleksandros smiled, brilliant and genuine, and it transformed his entire face. I'll pick you up at 8. I'll be ready. He lifted her bandaged hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity racing up her arm. Until then, Penelope Morrison. Then he was gone, moving with that supernatural speed, and Penelope was left standing alone in the growing daylight, her heart pounding, wondering what she'd just agreed to. The next day and a half passed in a strange haze of anticipation and anxiety. Penelope went to work, came home, tried to act normal, but her mind kept circling back to Aleksandros. She researched vampires on the internet, found mostly fiction and mythology, but some of the old legends matched what she'd observed: the pale skin, the sun sensitivity, the superhuman speed and strength. There were darker things too, stories of vampires as monsters, as killers, as soulless predators. But Aleksandros hadn't felt soulless. He'd felt more alive than anyone she'd ever met. When the night of their dinner finally arrived, Penelope spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to figure out what to wear. Everything in her closet seemed wrong, too casual, too worn, too cheap. Finally, she settled on a simple black dress she'd bought for a funeral 2 years ago and barely worn since. It wasn't much, but it was the best she had. She was pacing her tiny apartment, checking her phone every 30 seconds. when a knock sounded at her door. Penelope glanced at the clock. 7:55. Exactly 5 minutes early. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her dress, and opened the door. Aleksandros stood in the hallway and he took her breath away. He wore a dark suit tailored perfectly to his frame, his white hair pulled back in a low tie, and he held a bouquet of deep red roses that probably cost more than her rent. "You're beautiful," he said, and the reverence in his voice made her blush. "You're not so bad yourself." She took the flowers, their scent rich and heady. "Come in, let me put these in water." He stepped into her apartment, and Penelope was suddenly hyper-aware of how small and shabby it was: the peeling paint, the ancient furniture, the water stain on the ceiling from when the upstairs neighbor's toilet overflowed. But Aleksandros looked around with genuine interest, studying the paintings she'd done and hung on the walls, the plants she kept on the windowsill, the photographs of her family. "You painted these?" He moved closer to one of her canvases, a sunset over the city skyline she'd worked on for months. "Yeah, it's just a hobby now. I can't afford supplies very often." "You're talented." He turned to face her. "Have you thought about pursuing it professionally?" "I tried. Couldn't make it work financially. Art school is expensive and being an artist doesn't exactly pay the bills." She finished arranging the roses in her one nice vase. "But it's okay, I'm fine with how things are. Are you? You seem like someone with dreams bigger than a diner job." Penelope shrugged, uncomfortable with how easily he saw through her. "Doesn't matter what I dream about. Reality is reality." "Reality," Aleksandros said softly, "is more flexible than you think, especially when you have resources. I'm not looking for a handout. I'm not offering one. I'm simply saying your talent shouldn't be wasted. But we can discuss it later. Are you ready?" She grabbed her jacket, a worn leather thing that had seen better days, and followed him out. In the elevator, which groaned and shuddered alarmingly, Aleksandros stood close enough that she could feel the coolness radiating from his skin. Vampires must run cold, she realized. No heartbeat to warm the blood. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said as they descended. "Anything. Do you have a heartbeat?" His expression turned thoughtful. "Not the way you do. Our hearts beat perhaps once a minute, just enough to circulate blood through our system. We're not dead, despite what the legends say. We're simply different. And you need blood to survive, yes, though I haven't fed from a human in decades. I have other sources." "What kind of sources?" "Blood banks, mostly. The occasional animal when necessary. I made a decision long ago that I wouldn't take from the unwilling." He paused. "Does it frighten you?" "What I am?" Penelope considered the question honestly. "A little. But I've been terrified every day of my life in different ways, afraid of not making rent, afraid of getting sick and not being able to afford a doctor, afraid of walking home alone at night. At least with you, the fear feels purposeful, like there's something real behind it, not just a vague dread." The elevator lurched to a stop and the doors wheezed open. Aleksandros was quiet as they walked to his car, but when he opened her door, he caught her hand. "I will never harm you," he said with such intensity that she believed him completely. "I would sooner walk into the sun than cause you pain." "That seems extreme," Penelope managed, though her throat had gone tight. "You don't understand yet, but you will." He released her hand and closed her door, then circled around to the driver's side. They drove to a restaurant Penelope had only read about in the society pages. The kind of place where reservations took months and entrees cost more than she made in a week. The maitre greeted Aleksandros by name, led them to a private table in the back, brought wine without being asked. Penelope felt completely out of her depth, surrounded by elegance and wealth she could barely comprehend. "You're uncomfortable," Aleksandros observed once they were alone. "I don't belong here. Everyone's staring at us. They're staring because you're the most beautiful woman in the room, and because they recognize power when they see it." He poured her wine, the movement graceful. "But if you're truly uncomfortable, we can leave. Go somewhere you'd prefer." "No, it's fine. I'm just not used to this. Tell me about your family," he said, clearly changing the subject to put her at ease. "I saw photographs in your apartment." So Penelope talked about her mother in Arizona, her brother in the army, her grandmother who'd raised her after her father left. Aleksandros listened with complete attention, asking questions, remembering details. The food came exquisite dishes that tasted like heaven, and she watched him eat small portions, keeping up the pretense of humanity. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "Do you have family?" "I did once, a very long time ago." Something sad flickered across his face. "I was turned during the Byzantine Empire, pulled into this life against my will. I never saw my human family again. By the time I had the courage to return, they'd been dead for centuries. I'm sorry, it was a long time ago. The grief has faded to a distant ache." He set down his fork. "I've built a different kind of family since then, a court of vampires who answer to me, who look to me for guidance and protection. Though as I mentioned, I've been away from them for some time. Why? Because power can become its own prison. Because I grew tired of the scheming in politics, the constant jockeying for position. Because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be free. He paused. And perhaps because I was looking for something, though I didn't know what until I heard you scream. Penelope's heart skipped. You keep saying things like that, like I'm something special. But I'm just a waitress who got attacked by monsters. You're far more than that. I see it in how you look at the world, curious and brave despite everything trying to beat you down. I see it in your art, in the way you transform pain into beauty. I see it in how you didn't run from me when any sensible person would have. He reached across the table, took her hand. You're extraordinary, Penelope Morrison, and I would very much like to show you the world as I see it if you'll let me. What does that mean exactly? It means I want to court you properly, take you places, show you things, learn everything about you. It means I want to see if this feeling in my chest is what I think it is. What do you think it is? Aleksandros smiled, soft and almost shy. Something I never thought I'd feel again. Something I'm afraid to name too soon. They finished dinner in a warm haze of conversation and stolen glances. Aleksandros paid without looking at the bill, then drove her home through the city's glittering night. At her door he walked her up all 5 flights despite her protests, then stood in the hallway as she fumbled with her keys. Can I see you tomorrow? He asked. I have the late shift, then I'll come to the diner, sit in your section. Order coffee I won't drink and pie I won't eat just to watch you work. Penelope laughed. That's ridiculous. I'm 1,000 years old. I'm entitled to be ridiculous if I choose. He caught her hand, brought it to his lips again. Say yes, Penelope. Yes, she whispered, and was rewarded with that brilliant smile. He left with obvious reluctance, and Penelope stood in her doorway watching until he disappeared down the stairs. Then she went inside, locked the door and leaned against it with her eyes closed, trying to process everything that was happening. She was falling for a vampire, a king of vampires, and from the way he looked at her, the tenderness in his touch, the reverence in his voice, he was falling for her too. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the most wonderful thing she'd ever experienced. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing intimacy. Aleksandros did indeed come to the diner, sitting in her section for hours, leaving tips that made Pete's eyes bulge. He took her to museums after closing, using his influence to arrange private viewings. He showed her parts of the city she'd never seen, hidden gardens, forgotten architecture, rooftop views that took her breath away. And he talked to her, really talked, sharing stories of his long life, his regrets and triumphs, his loneliness and hope. Penelope found herself opening up in return, sharing dreams she'd buried, fears she'd never voiced, parts of herself she usually kept hidden. With Aleksandros, she felt safe to be vulnerable, safe to be entirely herself. But it wasn't all romance and fairy tale moments. There were complications. One night, about 3 weeks into their relationship, Penelope was walking home from the diner when she sensed she was being followed. She quickened her pace, heart hammering, memories of the ghoul attack flooding back. But when she glanced over her shoulder, she saw a woman pale and beautiful, with silver hair and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. You're the human, the woman said, her voice cold and aristocratic. The one who's caught the king's attention. Penelope stopped, turning to face her fully. Who are you? Serafina, one of his court. The vampire moved closer, circling Penelope like a predator. We've been looking for Aleksandros for months. He abandoned his duties, left us without leadership, all for what? A dalliance with a mortal? I don't know anything about that. You should talk to him directly. Oh, I intend to. But first, I wanted to see what was so special about you. What could possibly make our king forget his responsibilities? Serafina stopped in front of her, eyes narrowing. You're pretty enough, I suppose, but mortal, fragile. You'll be dead in the blink of an eye while he continues on for centuries. Did you really think this could last? The words hit harder than Penelope wanted to admit. She'd been trying not to think about that exact problem, the impossibility of a future together when their lifespans were so drastically different. What happens between Aleksandros and me is our business, she said, forcing strength into her voice. Not when it affects the stability of our court. Not when vampires are starting to question his authority, wondering if he's grown weak. Serafina leaned in and Penelope caught a glimpse of Fang. You're a liability, little human. For everyone's sake, including his, you should walk away. Is that a threat? Consider it advice. From someone who's seen kingdoms fall over far less. Then Serafina was gone, vanished into the shadows, and Penelope was left standing alone on the sidewalk, shaking. She didn't tell Aleksandros about the encounter that night when he called. Didn't mention it the next day when he took her to lunch, but it gnawed at her, the doubts Serafina had planted. Was she being selfish? Was she putting him in danger by continuing this relationship? On the third day, Aleksandros noticed something was wrong. "You've been distant," he said as they sat in his car outside her apartment. "What's troubling you?" "It's nothing, Penelope." He turned to face her fully. "I can read people exceptionally well after 1,000 years. You're clearly upset. Please talk to me." So she told him about Serafina, about the warning, about her own fears. Aleksandros listened without interrupting, but she could see fury building behind his eyes. "She had no right," he said when she finished. "No right to approach you, to threaten you, to make you doubt what we have. But she's right, isn't she? You have responsibilities, a court that needs you. And I'm just a human who's going to age and die while you stay exactly the same." Penelope's voice cracked. "Maybe we're being foolish. Maybe we should end this before Aleksandros kissed her." It was their first kiss, fierce and desperate and achingly tender all at once. His hand cupped the back of her head, fingers threading through her hair while his other arm wrapped around her waist. Penelope melted into him, into the cool press of his lips, the gentle scrape of fang, the overwhelming rightness of being held by him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Aleksandros rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you in that alley. Brave and terrified and so beautifully alive. I love you enough to face my court, to deal with their politics and power games if it means keeping you in my life. And as for the mortality issue, there are solutions, if you want them. Ways to extend your life or change it entirely." Penelope pulled back to look at him. "You mean turning me? I mean giving you the choice, when and if you're ready. No pressure, no expectations. But know that I want eternity with you, Penelope Morrison, however we can achieve it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too, God help me, I do, but I'm scared." "So am I." He kissed her again, softer this time. "But I'd rather face the fear with you than spend another century alone." They held each other in the darkness of the car, and Penelope felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This was worth fighting for. "What do we do about your court?" she asked eventually. "I suppose it's time I returned and reminded them exactly who rules." Aleksandros smiled, sharp and dangerous, and introduced them properly to the woman I intend to make my queen. "You're what, too soon?" He looked almost uncertain, which was endearing on someone usually so confident. "Maybe a little. How about we start with girlfriend and work our way up?" "Fair enough." He kissed her forehead. "But know my intentions, Penelope. I'm not playing games, I want everything with you." The next week, Aleksandros brought her to his court. His headquarters, because calling it anything less would be an understatement, was hidden beneath the city in a network of tunnels and chambers that had been expanded over centuries. The main hall was breathtaking. All Gothic architecture and modern luxury combined, with vaulted ceilings and elegant furnishings and artwork that probably belonged in museums. Penelope felt every eye on her as Aleksandros led her through the corridors, his hand firm on her waist. Vampires paused their conversations to stare. Some looked curious, others hostile, all of them impossibly beautiful and clearly dangerous. "Relax," Aleksandros murmured in her ear. "You're safe here, I've made sure of it." They entered the throne room, because of course there was a throne room, and found perhaps 50 vampires assembled, clearly waiting. At the front stood Serafina, her expression cold and calculating. "Your Majesty," she said with a bow that managed to be both respectful and mocking. "How good of you to finally return, Serafina." Aleksandros's voice carried power, making even Penelope shiver. "I understand, you approached my companion without permission, threatened her, made her question our relationship. I simply pointed out certain realities. You overstepped." He moved forward, still holding Penelope's hand, his presence filling the room. "Let me be absolutely clear to you and everyone here. Penelope Morrison is under my protection. She is precious to me beyond measure. Anyone who threatens her, frightens her, or even makes her uncomfortable will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" Silence. Then slowly the assembled vampires bowed. "Yes, Your Majesty," Serafina said, though her eyes burned with resentment. "Good. As for my absence, I apologize for leaving so abruptly. But I'm here now, and I'll be resuming my duties, with some changes." He pulled Penelope forward gently. "Penelope will be a permanent fixture in this court. She'll have access to all areas, all resources. She'll be learning our ways, our laws, our history. And she'll be treated with the same respect you'd show me." "Your Majesty," one of the other vampires spoke up, a man with dark hair and ancient eyes. "We mean no disrespect, but a human in our court? It's unprecedented, dangerous even." "There are those who might, then I'll destroy them," Aleksandros said simply. "I've led you for 5 centuries. I've kept this court safe and prosperous. I've earned the right to choose my own companion, and I choose her. If anyone has a problem with that, challenge me now. No one moved, no one spoke. Excellent. Aleksandros' expression softened as he looked at Penelope. Come, let me show you your new studio. He led her through the complex to a large room with north-facing windows modified somehow to filter out the deadly sunlight while still providing natural light. The space was filled with art supplies, everything she could possibly need and more. I had it prepared while we were falling in love, Aleksandros said. I wanted you to have a place to create, a place that's entirely yours. Penelope walked through the room, touching canvases and paints and brushes, overwhelmed. This is too much. It's nowhere near enough. He came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. I want to give you the world, Penelope. I want to support your dreams, help them flourish. Will you let me? She turned in his arms, looking up at the man, the vampire who'd changed everything. On one condition, name it, you let me support your dreams too. This can't be one-sided. We're partners. Aleksandros smiled, beautiful and genuine. Partners, I like that. They kissed in the studio, surrounded by the tools of her art, and Penelope felt hope bloom in her chest. Maybe they could make this work. Maybe love really was enough. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. 2 months into her new life-splitting time between her apartment and Aleksandros' court, Penelope was painting in her studio when alarms started blaring. She ran into the corridor to find vampires rushing past, armed and grimly focused. What's happening? She asked, catching someone's arm. Attack, rival court. The vampire pulled free and kept running. Penelope's blood ran cold. She searched for Aleksandros, finally finding him in the throne room issuing orders, dressed for battle in black tactical gear that somehow made him look even more dangerous. Penelope, he said when he saw her, relief and worry warring on his face. You need to get to the safe room now. What's going on? Victor's court is attacking. He wants my territory, my power. We've been enemies for centuries, and he's chosen now to make his move. Aleksandros gripped her shoulders. Please go to the safe room. You'll be protected there. What about you? I'll be fighting. It's what I do. He kissed her hard and fast. I love you. Stay safe. Then he was gone, moving with the other vampires toward the upper levels where the attack was apparently happening. Penelope stood frozen, torn between obeying his command and the desperate need to know he was okay. In the end, fear for him won out. She followed at a distance, staying in the shadows, making her way toward the sounds of fighting. What she found was chaos vampires clashing with inhuman speed and violence, the air thick with the scent of blood. She saw Aleksandros in the center of it all, a blur of deadly grace, taking on multiple opponents at once. He was magnificent, terrifying, absolutely in his element. Then Penelope saw the vampire coming at him from behind, saw the blade aimed at his back, saw the moment that would end him. She didn't think, just acted. Penelope ran forward, grabbing a fallen weapon, some kind of sword, and swung it with all her strength. The blade caught the attacking vampire across the chest, not enough to kill but enough to knock him off course. He turned toward her with a snarl, and Penelope realized she'd just made a terrible mistake. But before he could reach her, Aleksandros was there, interposing himself between her and the threat. His roar shook the chamber, primal and enraged, and the attacking vampire actually stumbled backward in fear. You dare, Aleksandros snarled, and his voice was nothing human, nothing civilized. You dare threaten what's mine. He moved so fast Penelope could barely track it, and when he stopped, the enemy vampire was on the ground, throat torn out, already turning to ash. Aleksandros spun toward her, eyes blazing and crimson, fangs fully extended, covered in blood. Are you hurt? His hands ran over her frantically, checking for injuries. I'm fine. I just saw him coming at you and I had to do something. You could have been killed. Aleksandros pulled her against his chest, holding her so tightly it almost hurt. You should have stayed in the safe room like I told you. I was worried about you. Around them, the fighting was dying down. Aleksandros' court had won, the attackers retreating or destroyed. But Aleksandros didn't seem to notice, too focused on Penelope. You saved my life, he said, wonder in his voice. Immortal saved the vampire king's life. I couldn't let you die. I love you. He kissed her there in the aftermath of battle, gentle despite the violence still clinging to him, and Penelope tasted blood on his lips, not hers, not his, but the enemies he'd destroyed to keep her safe. Marry me, Aleksandros said when they broke apart. Penelope blinked. What? Marry me. Be my queen in truth, not just in courtesy. Stand beside me for however long you'll have me. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I know it's fast by human standards. I know we have obstacles to overcome, but I've never been more certain of anything. You're my mate, Penelope Morrison, the other half of my soul, so marry me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Around them, the assembled vampires had gone silent, watching, waiting. Yes, Penelope whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. The throne room erupted in cheers. Even Serafina looked grudgingly approving. Aleksandros lifted Penelope and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, and she clung to him and let herself believe in fairy tales. The wedding was planned for 6 weeks later, a blend of vampire tradition and human custom that took enormous coordination. Penelope invited her mother and brother, prepared them as best she could for the truth about what she was marrying into. Her mother took it surprisingly well, perhaps because she could see how happy Penelope was. Her brother was more skeptical, but after meeting Aleksandros and seeing how carefully he treated his sister, he gave his grudging approval. The ceremony itself was held in the throne room, transformed into something beautiful with flowers and candles and fabric draped from the vaulted ceiling. Vampires and humans mingled. Penelope's co-workers from the diner rubbing elbows with centuries-old immortals. Pete brought pie, Aleksandros' court brought ancient wine and formal toasts. Penelope wore a dress Aleksandros had commissioned, white silk that flowed like water, with lace sleeves and a train that seemed to go on forever. When she walked down the aisle on her brother's arm, Aleksandros stood at the front in a black suit, and the expression on his face made her chest ache with love. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises of forever, of partnership, of facing whatever came together. When Aleksandros slipped the ring on her finger, an antique ruby that had belonged to Byzantine royalty, Penelope felt the weight of it like a promise. "I love you," she said, just for him. "My queen," he murmured back. "My love, my eternity." They kissed as the assembled crowd cheered, and Penelope felt like she was flying. The reception lasted until dawn drove the vampires underground. Penelope danced with her new husband, with her brother, with her mother who cried happy tears. She talked with members of the court who seemed genuinely pleased to welcome her. She ate cake and laughed and felt more alive than ever before. Later, when the guests had departed and it was just the two of them in Aleksandros' chambers, their chambers now, he held her gently and asked the question they'd been circling around for months. "Do you want this life, truly? Because we still have time to turn back if you're not sure." Penelope thought about it seriously. Becoming a vampire would mean giving up sunlight, giving up her humanity in many ways. But it would also mean eternity with Aleksandros. Time to pursue her art without worrying about money. The ability to stand beside him as an equal in power, not just in love. "I want it," she said. "Not right away. I'd like a few more years as I am. Time to say proper goodbyes to my family, to make peace with the change. But yes, I want to be with you forever, Aleksandros, whatever that takes." Relief and joy flooded his features. "We'll wait as long as you need. I have nothing but time." They made love that night with exquisite tenderness, learning each other's bodies, expressing with touch what words couldn't capture. And afterward, wrapped in Aleksandros' arms, Penelope felt peace settle over her. The next 5 years were the happiest of her life. She worked on her art, held exhibitions that sold out, gained recognition in the human art world. She learned vampire politics and history, became a skilled negotiator and trusted advisor. She maintained her connection to humanity, still visited her family, still kept in touch with Maya and her other friends from the diner, but built a life in the vampire court too. Aleksandros proved to be an extraordinary husband. Patient and supportive, fierce and protective, endlessly loving. They traveled the world together, visiting places he'd known centuries ago and new locations they discovered together. They faced challenges, rival courts, political intrigue, the occasional threat, but always as partners, always united. And finally, when Penelope turned 31, she told Aleksandros she was ready. The transformation was done with ceremony and care. Aleksandros explained every step, made sure she understood what she was choosing, gave her every opportunity to change her mind. But Penelope's resolve never wavered. On the night of the winter solstice, surrounded by their court, Aleksandros gave her his blood and she drank deep. Then he drained her carefully, gently, until her human heart gave its last beat. The transition period lasted 3 days. 3 days of pain and fever and strange dreams, but Aleksandros never left her side, holding her through the worst of it. When Penelope finally opened her eyes, the world had changed. Colors were brighter, sounds sharper, scents overwhelming in their complexity. She could hear Aleksandros' slow heartbeat, could smell the ancient blood in his veins, could sense the other vampires throughout the complex with a new awareness. And when she looked at her husband, she saw him with new eyes, saw the power and grace and terrible beauty that had always been there but which she could now fully perceive. "How do you feel?" he asked, voice gentle. Penelope sat up, marveling at the strength in her body, the way she moved with impossible fluidity. "Alive, more alive than ever. You're beautiful." Aleksandros cupped her face, and she saw herself reflected in his eyes, pale skin, white hair like his, eyes that glowed crimson. "My queen, my eternal love." They had centuries ahead of them now. centuries to love and laugh and build their kingdom together. Penelope would miss the sun, would grieve the humanity she'd given up. But looking at Aleksandros, feeling the bond between them that was now deeper than ever, she knew she'd made the right choice. "I love you," she said, the words carrying weight they'd never had before, not just a declaration but a promise, not just for now but for forever. "And I love you." Aleksandros pulled her close, held her like she was precious beyond measure. "My Penelope, thank you for choosing this life, for choosing me." They kissed as the night stretched around them, infinite and full of possibility. Outside, the city hummed with life they would protect and guide for generations to come. Below, their court waited to celebrate their queen's rebirth. But in that moment there was only the two of them, vampire king and newly turned queen, bound together by love that had conquered death itself. Years turned to decades. Penelope proved to be a natural leader, her human compassion combining with vampire strength to create something unique and powerful. She championed reforms that improved relations between humans and vampires, established programs to help new vampires adjust, used her art to bridge the two worlds. Aleksandros ruled beside her with pride, watching his wife flourish in ways he'd always known she would. They faced challenges together, rival courts that needed to be dealt with, political intrigue that tested their resolve, moments when the weight of immortality felt crushing. But they never faced anything alone. They'd built something rare and precious, a true partnership, based on love and respect and absolute trust. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Aleksandros took Penelope back to the alley where they'd first met. The industrial district had been revitalized, the dangerous corners cleaned up, the ghouls long since cleared out. But the spot where he'd first heard her scream, where he'd scattered the wild dogs with a roar and knelt to check her torn hands, remained unchanged at his request. "Do you remember?" he asked, holding her hand. "Every detail," Penelope said. "I was terrified, in pain, certain I was going to die, and then you appeared and everything changed. You changed everything for me." Aleksandros turned to face her fully. "Before you I was lost, going through the motions of immortality without purpose, without joy. You gave me a reason to truly live again." "We saved each other," Penelope said softly. "I was drowning in a life I didn't want, trapped by circumstances I couldn't change. You offered me freedom and choice and love. You gave me the world." "No." Aleksandros pulled her close, rested his forehead against hers the way he had that night in the car decades ago. "You were always destined for greatness. I simply gave you the time and resources to achieve it. Everything you've become, you built yourself." Penelope kissed him, slow and deep, pouring 50 years of love into it. Around them, the city hummed with life, a city they'd helped shape, that they'd protected and guided, that would continue long after even their immortal lives eventually ended. But that was centuries away, perhaps millennia. For now there was only this moment, this love, this partnership that had defied every odd. "Take me home," Penelope murmured against his lips. Aleksandros smiled, beautiful and eternal. "Always." They walked back to their car hand in hand, vampire king and vampire queen, partners for eternity, their love story written in the space between heartbeats and across the expanse of forever. And if sometimes Penelope missed the sun, missed the simplicity of her mortal life, she only had to look at Aleksandros to remember why she'd made her choice. Because love, true love, was worth any sacrifice, worth eternity, worth everything. And they lived, immortal and together, ruling their court with wisdom and compassion, creating art that would outlast empires, building a legacy that would echo through the centuries. The human waitress and the vampire king, bound by a love that had started with a scream in a dark alley and blossomed into something legendary. Their story became legend among vampires and humans alike, proof that love could bridge any divide, that different worlds could merge beautifully, that sometimes the most unlikely connections became the strongest bonds. Young vampires looked to them as examples of what partnerships could be. Humans who learned the truth about the supernatural world saw them as hope that coexistence was possible. Penelope continued her art, and her paintings graced museums worldwide, though only a select few knew the artist was the vampire queen herself. She painted love and loss, darkness and light, the beauty of immortality and the bittersweet ache of watching mortal friends age and die. Each piece was a masterwork, infused with centuries of emotion and experience. Aleksandros, for his part, proved that power didn't require cruelty. Under his continued rule, his court became the most prosperous and progressive in the vampire world. He established laws protecting both vampires and humans, created systems for peaceful coexistence, and showed that a king could lead with both strength and compassion. Together, they were unstoppable. On their 100th anniversary, they renewed their vows in the same throne room where they'd first married, surrounded by vampires who'd become family, and a few precious humans who'd learned their secret. Penelope wore white again, though this time she moved with the grace of a century-old vampire, powerful and confident in ways her mortal self could never have imagined. 100 years, Aleksandros said during his vows, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. 100 years of loving you, learning from you, building this life with you. And it still feels like the beginning, like we're just getting started. We are, Penelope agreed, taking his hands. We have forever, remember? This is just the first chapter. Then I can't wait to see what comes next. They kissed and the assembled crowd cheered, and somewhere in the city above, dawn was breaking on a new day. A day Penelope would never see, having long since traded sunlight for starlight, mortality for eternity, ordinary life for extraordinary love. And she'd never once regretted it, because sometimes fairy tales were real. Sometimes the monster turned out to be the hero. Sometimes a scream in a dark alley led to a love that would last literally forever. Sometimes everything worked out exactly as it should. Penelope Morrison had been saved by a vampire king who scattered wild dogs with a roar, then knelt to check her torn hands with impossible gentleness. And in return she'd saved him right back from loneliness, from purposelessness, from an eternity spent merely existing instead of truly living. They were each other's salvation, each other's completion, each other's forever. And as they held each other in the throne room, surrounded by love and life and the promise of endless tomorrows, both knew with absolute certainty that they'd found something rare and precious and worth any price. They'd found each other, and that was enough. More than enough. The celebration continued late into the night. But eventually the guests departed and Aleksandros and Penelope retreated to their private chambers. The rooms had evolved over the century, filled with art and memories and treasures they'd collected together. Photographs of their wedding, of travels to distant countries, of moments both grand and intimate. Paintings Penelope had created, capturing the love in Aleksandros' eyes, the strength in his hands, the way he looked at her like she was his entire world, because she was, just as he was hers. "What are you thinking?" Aleksandros asked, coming up behind her as she stood looking at a painting of their first kiss. "That I'm grateful. For all of it, the good and the hard, the challenges and the triumphs. Every moment that brought us here." She leaned back into his embrace. "I never imagined this life, never dreamed it was possible. Neither did I. I'd given up on love, on connection, on anything beyond duty and power. Then you screamed, and something in me woke up after centuries of sleep." His arms tightened around her. "You're my miracle, Penelope, and you're mine." They stood together in comfortable silence, two immortals who'd found their home in each other. Outside, the city they'd helped build continued its endless rhythm. Inside, in the sanctuary of their chambers, time seemed to slow. "Do you ever miss it?" Aleksandros asked eventually. "Your mortal life?" Penelope considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the sun. I miss my mother, my brother, the friends who've passed. I miss the simplicity, the not knowing that monsters were real." She turned in his arms to face him. "But I don't regret choosing this. Choosing you. Those losses are painful, but the love we've built makes them bearable. You could have had a normal life, married a human man, had children, grown old surrounded by grandchildren. I could have. But that life would have been empty without you." She cupped his face, thumb brushing across his cheekbone. "You gave me choices I never had before. The freedom to pursue my art, the power to make real changes in the world, and most importantly, the experience of being loved completely and unconditionally. No ordinary life could compare to that." Aleksandros kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "I love you. I will love you until stars burn out and the world ends. You know that, yes? I do. Just as I will love you until my very last breath, whenever that may come." Penelope smiled. "We're quite the pair, aren't we? The vampire king and his once mortal queen." "We're perfect," Aleksandros corrected. "Perfectly matched. Perfectly balanced. Perfect for each other." And he was right. Despite every obstacle, every difference, every reason their relationship shouldn't have worked, it did. They worked. Because love didn't care about logic or reason. Love simply was. They made love that night with the practiced intimacy of a century together, knowing exactly how to touch, how to move, how to bring each other pleasure. But there was still discovery in it, still wonder, still the sense of infinite possibility that came from truly being with your soulmate. Afterward, wrapped together in their bed, Penelope traced idle patterns on Aleksandros' chest and let herself dream about the future. The artwork she wanted to create, the places they'd yet to visit, the changes they could still make in the world. There was so much time ahead of them, so many possibilities. "Tell me a story," she murmured. "One of the old ones." Aleksandros' chest rumbled with quiet laughter. "After 100 years together, you've heard them all multiple times. Tell me anyway, I like hearing your voice." So he did, speaking of Constantinople and Viking raids and the fall of Rome, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. Penelope listened, safe and content, knowing she could listen to him talk for centuries more and never grow tired of it. This was happiness, this was peace, this was the life she'd chosen and would choose again in every lifetime. Eventually, even vampires needed rest. As they drifted toward sleep, the light meditation state that served them in place of true unconsciousness, Penelope felt Aleksandros press a kiss to her hair. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For screaming that night. For being brave enough to stay when you should have run. For choosing this life. Choosing me. For every moment of the last 100 years. His voice was thick with emotion. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Penelope Morrison. In over 1,000 years of existence, you're the only thing that's ever truly mattered." Tears pricked Penelope's eyes. "You're everything to me too, my savior, my husband, my king, my home. I can't imagine existence without you. You'll never have to. We're bound together now, for as long as we both endure." "Forever, then forever," he agreed. And it was a promise they both intended to keep. The years continued to pass, decades blurring into centuries. The world changed around them, technology advancing, societies evolving, but Aleksandros and Penelope remained constant. Their love didn't fade or diminish with time. If anything, it deepened, growing stronger with each shared experience, each overcome obstacle, each moment of joy or sorrow they weathered together. They weren't perfect. They argued occasionally, disagreed on policy and politics and where to hang particular pieces of art. But they always came back together, always communicated, always chose their partnership over pride or stubbornness, because that was what love meant. Not the absence of conflict, but the commitment to work through it. Not eternal bliss, but the willingness to face challenges together. Not perfection, but acceptance of each other's flaws and the determination to grow together anyway. Penelope became legend among vampires, the mortal who'd captured a king's heart, who'd transformed into a powerful queen in her own right, who'd helped shape modern vampire society into something more humane and just. Young vampires studied her policies, admired her art, aspired to find love like hers. Aleksandros, for his part, became known not just as a powerful king but as a devoted husband, proof that vampires could love as deeply and truly as any mortal. His dedication to Penelope never wavered, never diminished. Even after centuries, he still looked at her like she was his entire world. Because she was. On their 200th anniversary, they threw the celebration to end all celebrations. Vampires from courts worldwide attended, along with select humans who'd earned their trust. The throne room was transformed into something magical, and the festivities lasted a week. But the most special moment came when they were alone, just the two of them on the balcony overlooking the city, under stars that blazed eternal overhead. 200 years. Penelope marveled. "It sounds impossible when I say it out loud, and yet here we are." Aleksandros pulled her close, and they swayed together to music only they could hear. Still together, still in love, still discovering new things about each other. Will it always be like this? If we're lucky, if we keep choosing each other, keep communicating, keep making this partnership our priority. He spun her gently, then drew her back against his chest. "I can't predict the future, my love. But I know that whatever comes, I want to face it with you." "Good. Because you're stuck with me." Penelope grinned up at him. "For better or worse, remember? The better has far outweighed any worse." Aleksandros bent to kiss her, slow and sweet. "You're my greatest treasure, Penelope, my most precious gift, and I will spend eternity showing you how much you mean to me. You already do, every day with every gesture, every look, every moment of tenderness. I feel loved completely, Aleksandros, cherished, valued. You make me feel like I matter." "You do matter. You matter more than anything." They held each other as the celebration continued inside, as the city hummed with life below, as the universe spun through its endless dance. Two immortals who'd found their forever in each other, who'd built something beautiful from a chance encounter in a dark alley 2 centuries ago. The vampire king who'd scattered wild dogs with a roar, then knelt to check her torn hands with impossible gentleness. The mortal woman who'd been brave enough to trust him, strong enough to stand beside him, wise enough to know that true love was worth any sacrifice. They were proof that fairy tales could be real, that love could conquer death itself, that sometimes, against all odds, two souls found their perfect match, and they lived eternal and inseparable, their love a beacon for others, their partnership a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other completely. Forever wasn't a burden when you spent it with your soulmate. It was a gift, and Penelope and Aleksandros treasured every moment of it, from their first meeting in blood and violence and desperate salvation, through centuries of love and laughter and partnership, to an ending that would never come. because their story wasn't meant to end. It was meant to continue, page after page, year after year, century after endless century. Together, always together. And that was exactly how they wanted it.